Hello, and thank you for listening to Renewables, a podcast by BioStar, which aims to explore the current and future energy landscape in America.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Renewables. Happy Friday to you. We are really excited about this week's episode and proud to have Sean Andrews, the CPO and Head of Sustainability at E-Volve Energy, with us today. Sean, thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule and joining us here today.
Thanks, David. Really excited to be here and appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. You all have had, like everyone, probably a bit of a roller coaster to deal with this last year in 2020, opening a relatively new company. But before we get into E-Volve and sort of the trials and tribulations that come with being an entrepreneur in the pandemic environment, just set the stage a little bit for our listeners and viewers about yourself. Give us some background about yourself and how you ended up starting E-Volve.
Sure. So I started in this industry in the retail energy side of the business at Reliance Energy. It's been more than a decade at this point. Spent time there on the structuring desk, then made my way through a couple of startups and really took front and mid office type of roles within those organizations. Background being in structuring, that kind of being my kind of core of what I go back to, but trading, pricing, and risk management. And while in the retail power business, of course, you come across a lot of different types of structures and things that energy brokers are doing out in the market. And while at conferences and things, I noticed over the few years prior to coming over to this side of the business that there were some new folks coming around to conferences that were in the solar industry, and then also just on various ECMs. And, in talking with my now business partner, Nick Barker, he had left the retail power business a few years before I did, started a broker shop, and then started also working in, implementing solutions, demand-based solutions for clients here in Texas. Shortly thereafter, he and I started working on a business plan, and he was able to secure funding to start up an organization to really tackle the needs of C&I customers in the deregulated space. I think that what we were noticing is a lot of what is built around savings and renewable energy and the value of it for clients is really built around a utility model, and didn't really take into account what we think is important from an integrated solution perspective, integrating contracts. So, shortly thereafter, we split that organization and started up E-Volve, and have been doing that for the past couple of years.
Awesome. And I was probably one of those new faces, me and maybe some of my colleagues. I know that starting back in probably 2017, we started attending TIPA events, which is the Energy Professionals Association. And I know you're involved with TIPA, right? We've had some of your colleagues on the show. Tell us a little bit just quickly about your involvement with TIPA and kind of what you do over there.
Yeah, TIPA, is a great organization, brings together a lot of, really sharp industry professionals, provides a platform for, of course, networking and transparency in the market so that we can, as an organization, they can provide, place for that to happen, but for exchanging of ideas. I'm involved in the TIPA Tech Committee, where we discuss new technology that's hitting the market that can impact our clients, and really look to spread that knowledge to the members and give them an opportunity to maybe talk to various vendors that are out there.
That's awesome. And yeah, shout out to Shira, who's been on our show, and to Sean Kelly, who's been on our show. And for our listeners and viewers who haven't heard their episodes, I would highly encourage you to go back. Both very, very smart individuals. And I really got a lot out of recording those episodes. So go back into the archives and check out those episodes. And so I'm interested to know just a little bit for our viewers and listeners, just kind of tell us more about your services and your offerings and what type of customers, are you typically looking to partner with, or what type of customers, I guess, can you best help achieve their goals?
Yeah, so I mean, our objective is around managing risk and ultimately creating value for commercial industrial clients through integrated energy efficiency and sustainability solutions. We look to strategically reduce how much energy is being pulled from the grid, and put control and management in their hands. We do that, through a deep understanding of the markets and their usage patterns. I mean, the first thing that we are looking to do is not to say we sell lighting, we sell solar, we sell whatever behind the meter solution. We say, what are you doing, and let us take a look at your energy usage and your facility and determine what is going to be the best approach. So, the folks that we are typically involved with, I mean, it's really a myriad. We've done, worked with customers as small as $100,000 spend annually to up to 40 million in spend annually in enterprise-wide type solutions. And so, it's every, in the past few years that we've been doing this, there's been no two clients that have been alike. It makes it really someone like me who is really in the background, doing a lot of the number crunching and supporting our sales team and really focusing on executing these strategies and what the financials are going to look like, and what the ROI is going to look like, and what the payback is going to look like. And the difficult part is that I don't have a one size fit all model, right?
Sure.
And just plug this into some master system. I think over time, you can build something like that, but the challenge really is that we live and work in an ever-changing environment in energy, with different states, different utilities, different PUCs, different ISOs, right, that you're working around, and the charges and the way you are credited for things, and incentives and rebates and things are just different in every location. So we really like to tailor our solutions to our clients as best we can.
Absolutely. Do you all work mostly in deregulated states, or do you kind of venture outside into the regulated electric states as well?
Well, so our backgrounds being in the deregulated markets, and the client base that my business partner had prior to me joining was based on a broker, energy brokerage type of portfolio. Started there in the deregulated space, but very quickly we got into regulated areas because of a couple of things. One, enterprise-wide clients that have multiple locations around the U.S. We were, as energy brokers, you're only able to touch the usage and able to help with savings on one side of the equation in one part of the markets, meaning deregulated versus regulated. With solution-based activities and ECMs, you're really able to touch as many sites as are needed across the US. And so that is one avenue that has brought us into regulated markets. And the other aspect is referrals. You do a couple of things for somebody, and they say, well, I've got a buddy in Nebraska, and maybe you can help them.
Sure.
And so that's kind of how we get around. We aren't at this point, because I think there's just so much work for our industry to do, both on the renewable side as well as on the demand reduction side. we're not venturing too far away to have to find things. We're not, cold calling. We're not, there's so much out there.
Sure.
I think we probably uh, uh, have more work than we can handle. Is more of an issue. How do we handle it all? And
Sure.
to have, right? Of course, things slowed down a lot last year with people not wanting to spend money and kind of saving up for that rainy day that happened.
Sure.
Rainy months.
Rainy year.
Yeah.
Yeah, so talk a little bit more about that because I think, you kind of opened the business late 18, I think, ish, and starting to get some traction probably in 19. Just talk about, being an entrepreneur in this pandemic environment and how you've been able to. You mentioned things were slow. I think the whole industry felt that, particularly around, dealing with commercial and industrial customers who are trying to work within some sort of capital budget. But talk a little bit about. We first of all, let me just say, we love to talk about our failures on this show. We try to make that a theme of this show because if we just get on here and talk about all the things we've done right and paint this sunny picture, I think as entrepreneurs, we know that that's not really the reality of being an entrepreneur. So please, don't hesitate to talk about your failures as well. But just talk more about what it was like kind of starting up, being in startup mode, with the cloud of a pandemic over you.
Yeah. I feel like we've been in startup mode for 3 years.
Yeah.
And, I don't know when you get out of startup mode, when do you slow down the pace? And, I don't even want to think about that right now. I think it's go, 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 right? But, you have to think about, frame this up a little bit. In this part of the business, when you're dealing with project-based stuff, you're looking at 12 to 24 month sales cycles. There's an education process with the client. There is different layers of management that you have to get on board, and the larger the more layers you have to deal with. The facilities people are going to want to know different information than the operations group portion of a part of an organization, or the CFO and their finance team, right? Everybody's looking at different aspects of why a solution makes sense for them, and everybody has an opinion. So getting over those hurdles when you're dealing with larger organizations is something that has been a challenge. And we've had to kind of tweak and really better understand. And really, it's understanding and knowing your client is one thing, but also recognizing and through trial and error some of the things that we might have spent a lot of time on that nobody really cared about, and I could have spent more time on this other aspect of the business and maybe move the needle a little bit quicker. But at the end of the day, our objective is to meet their needs and whatever those are, whether that be sustainability or purely reduction in OpEx. So there's a difference between, and you can have both, but it's just that it's where's your focus, and so that we can tailor our focus towards that. But so if you think about, that 12 to 24 month sales cycle and going through pilot phases and, with larger clients, and then looking for findings after that, and then saying, okay, now we've got the findings, we believe in what you're doing, let's roll this out. And then it's right. And then they say, wait, hold on, let's wait a couple of weeks until, until this blows over. And my school and I don't have to, work from home and see what happens, right? And weeks turn into months. And so we went through a little lull there, I think, end of March through June, July. When people picked their heads back up, they started to recognize, okay, this is a normal for now. I don't know if it's the new normal, how long it's going to last, but let's see, what do our books look like now? Are we willing to spend money? And our conversation started shifting from, and what we've been doing is, as much as you hear about energy as a service and subscription type models, we haven't seen as much adoption. I'm not saying that it's not out there, just the type of clients that we deal with have to either find their own financing or pay cash, and it just is what it is, right? So um, uh, we saw an increased interest in those OpEx type models from these corporate clients who have the tax liability, and that's why they typically are saying, let's capitalize this cost rather than go to this as a service type of model. So we're not dealing with say municipalities, but government type entities, school districts or universities or anything like that. I think that model fits really well for those types of group or cities. We're dealing with, medium to large size private corporate companies that have the cash, but now don't want to spend it. And they say, what are our options? So we got to spend some time exploring that a little bit more with them. And I think, by the end of the year, we got, there was just a ton of opportunity that started to come to fruition. And 2021 has really kicked off, really strongly. So we've got everything that we were working on back in March and then some.
Yeah, that's great. And I echo the sentiment. We have basically the same story, over at BioStar, looking at in 2000, kind of March 2020, April 2020, or going into March and April, had a lot of kind of medium to large size commercial private businesses. Same thing. Everybody kind of put it on pause. It was really in September when I started to kind of feel the engine start to rev under me a little bit and start, like you said, okay, maybe this is the normal for now, and we have to learn how to operate within this normal for now. And we feel the same way. And then you kind of go into the winter, and this is not a political podcast, but with the administration changing in Washington, D.C., the last kind of 60 days have just been like, wow, it's a great time to be in the renewable energy business. You can really start to feel that engine revving, and we believe 2021 is going to be great for companies like ours. And for our viewers and listeners, if you're hearing that a lot of similarities, if you know about BioStar, and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, it sounds like Sean and his company are kind of really similar to David and his company. We are, absolutely. The difference is we don't really have a lot of crossover customers. And so one thing that I think is so cool about the renewable energy business in general, and even the demand side, kind of energy conservation measure side of the business, is that people are really collaborative, and people in our industry are really willing to work together. It feels like, to really find that kind of best solution for their customer, and take more of a unified team approach. So that is a long-winded way of me thanking you, Sean, for the opportunity to kind of look at some things with some of your customers, and offer expertise where it makes sense for us to. And we've certainly enjoyed trying to wrap our hands around some challenges that your customers have been having, and certainly look forward to hopefully doing more of that in the future. And so let's shift a little bit, kind of just away from COVID, and really just more to this broader energy landscape. And we're seeing a lot of changes from a legislative standpoint. We're seeing a lot of changes just from a marketing standpoint, the way that companies are talking about themselves and talking about their brands, to particularly consumer brands. What are you paying attention to the most, kind of in this rapidly changing landscape? Or maybe put a different way, what gets you excited that you're sort of starting to hear from your customers, and what excites you about the position that you're in, and sort of the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, and I do echo the sentiment about the collaboration, just to throw that out there. And I think it's really goes back to what I talked about earlier is there's just so much for us to do, and there's so much opportunity. We don't have to bump heads. We can collaborate,
Yeah.
and we can tackle this big issue together of reducing grid sourced energy, and decentralizing the grid.
Yep.
And so, some of the things, I mean, obviously, I think, I'd say, top of mind on the renewable side is, how the ITC credit is going to play out. I've heard that there's proposals to kind of bring back the 30%. I think that would, that helps. I think extending the 26% ITC over 2 years, made it is kind of making a big difference. I think one of the things you lose from that is that flurry that you have at the end of the year of everybody trying to safe harbor their projects.
Sure.
And so, now everybody's got kind of a 2-year window. So that flurry is probably not going to happen at the end of this year. It would happen next year if everything stays this, right? But the other aspect of that is not just how it impacts solar, but at some point, does the ITC extend to standalone storage?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's caveat with storage being tied to a renewable project, because then you're talking about I think it's with a highly penetrated renewable grid, you're seeing the need for that, and California has gone their own way and highly subsidized battery storage behind the meter for clients and such, and we'll see how that plays out for their market, for the CAISO market. Hopefully it helps solve some of the issues that they've run into over the past few years. But those are certainly front of mind. I think that technology costs coming down significantly is also a big thing outside of the regulatory realm. I think that's why we're seeing so much activity in the past 5 years, is because of technology costs coming down, right? Where there was certainly some OGs in the market that started in solar when it wasn't cool, and when it wasn't economical, and now that the economics are there, even in a market like Texas where people are paying an average of 8-9 cents a kilowatt hour, this widespread adoption is happening. It's happening really fast. So we're excited about that. Certainly makes our jobs a little bit easier. You still have to tell the story. You still have to show, that there's a return associated within the investment, but there's just so much more opportunity from that perspective. I think that utilities, as they, recognize how big of an impact the increased utility scale solar projects are going to have on their on the grid, is going to create either transmission projects or in one way, shape, or form, some of the fixed costs associated with the T&D, transmission and distribution, to increase over time. So that's something we have to watch out for and really understand, like, how it's going to impact our clients on the back end. It does sort of increase the value of the payback because you're avoiding that cost, but which one feeds the other?
Right.
I get into a lot of details, when it comes down to the financing aspect of it. So, but it's all really interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and there's a lot to look at because we won't get too far into the weeds on this call or on this episode, but what Sean's saying there around transmission and delivery is that even if you go and put solar on your roof, and you're able to vastly, reduce the amount of kilowatt hours that you're pulling from the grid. The utility could at any time say, well, we're just going to shift the way that your bill works, and now we've seen a shift towards more transmission and delivery costs. Sean, you probably know more about this stuff than I do, but now I don't think it's uncommon to see where if you look and break out your utility bill, it's certainly not for our customers, it's not uncommon to see where the transmission and delivery is accounting for as much as 50% of the cost in that bill. And so it's interesting to hear you kind of say, you expect to see that continue to rise, because you kind of start to think, well, gosh, how high could it go, right? I mean, at some point. So that's really interesting. And I think just so for our viewers and listeners who aren't necessarily as down in the weeds, why are they charging more for the transmission and delivery? Well, it's to maintain their profits, but also they're having to go and reinvest in the electricity grid, which is something that there's a great book called The Grid. If anybody hasn't read that or wants to kind of geek out about some of the flaws with our current national grid, and it's a beast. It's a lot to maintain. There's a couple of our episodes I would encourage folks to go back and look at. Andrew Barth's episode with CSD, we talk a lot about that. Lila Ontiveros, actually from Freedom Solar, it likes to geek out on stuff from the grid, and she was on one of our early episodes, so we talk about that in there. But it's really fascinating, and it's important because we go and show our customers, hey, here's what you're going to save, and here's the payback, and life is good. But we don't have control of ultimately how the utility charges that customer going forward in the future. So it's hugely important.
Yeah, and if you look at the extreme of it, because I think this is when I look into different scenarios and kind of the spread of possibilities of spend and such, I always look at the extremes. I look at the very high and the very low and what could that, right? The extreme of it is, let's say every household or every building facility has some kind of behind the meter solar on their rooftop or next to their facility, let's say, but all behind the meter. The number of miles of transmission and distribution lines did not change, and there's a fixed cost to managing those things. So if behind the meter usage has decreased by 25%, well, that's your denominator, and so your unit cost to manage that fixed cost of the T&D is going up. Maybe it was 5 cents a kilowatt hour, now it's 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So on a unit cost basis, you have to figure that they have fixed costs that they have to manage. The other thing which you touched on is they have these utilities have rates of returns that are pretty much guaranteed through the PEC, right? Because they have to manage, and so that's a factor for sure.
Yeah, it's all fascinating. And you mentioned financing, and so I'm just curious, kind of your take on, the financing going forward. I think I heard you say kind of pre-COVID, just sort of your mix of customers weren't necessarily as interested in that sort of as a service model and the financing model. And maybe that's become more interesting. How do you see that playing out? Do you see that sort of retreating back to where it was pre-COVID, or do you think people are kind of waking up to, hey, there's good, efficient ways to finance these projects and maybe go and use our capital elsewhere that might create a better return?
Yeah, I mean, it really just depends on where a company is in their life cycle, what their tax liability looks like, where they think they're going to be over time. The challenge, for us comes to, especially when dealing with private commercial companies, is credit. And saying, so because credit's going to dictate, kind of the rates of returns that the banks or whoever the financier is looking for. And when those numbers get too high, well, it's kind of hard to say, yeah, we could do energy as a service, but it's going to be 20%, like
Right.
that's going to be your rate, embedded rate, right? There's so much embedded in that. But at the end of the, the pro is that you're going to be able to take this as an OPEX instead of a CAPEX. And it just really depends on where a business is. I'd like to see is for those rates to get more competitive, but also for financiers to have a maybe a different view. And I'm not. I've never sat on the side of a bank or of any type of financing entity. But what exactly are you looking for? What exactly are you looking at? And why can't you look at a business this way versus that way? Because as you can see here, they have a significant cash balance. But you're taking into account this segment of debt, and we're only looking for this much money. I mean, there's so many factors. I think that it's just really going to be on a case by case basis. I think the energy as a service, is really for groups that don't have tax liability. And I'm not, so let's just not talk about, commercial customers that don't have the tax liability. And you can kind of relate this somewhat to PPAs as well, right, on the renewable side. It's very similar concept in the way that I look at it. But, churches, schools, cities, and anybody that just doesn't have, they're tax exempt. So those will be, no brainers, right, for them, because they can't capitalize on that capital write-off, right? And but then you have the commercial industrial companies that, every company is going to do their best to kind of zero out, their tax liability, and you can only go so far. And I'm dealing with, the medium and sometimes smaller size private companies. We're not talking about publicly traded, huge, giant numbers of profits to deal with here. So
Sure.
It's just a different, customer class that I think is, and the reason that we look at this class and we're successful in it, I think, is because the larger you get, the more likely it is you're going to have in-house management. And we're sort of an outsourced kind of energy strategy organization and implementation.
Sure.
There's a niche there, and there's a huge need for these customers that can't afford to have the expertise on staff, but they spend a lot in energy, and so they still need to pay attention to it and watch that line item, as it pertains to their company's financials.
Absolutely. Well, I would say you hit the nail on the head with the credit issue. That's always the number one, issue for us when we're looking at a new project, whether it be a PPA or using some other financing vehicle. Even when the customer wants to own it using a capital lease, we still bump up against this credit issue all the time, because we're trying to take solar, which has a 25 or 30-year life, and we're trying to amortize it over, some shorter term that a bank will give you. And so there's actually some interesting companies out there right now who are, I think, kind of in the starting phases of being able to revolutionize the lad a little bit. There's a company called Radiant REIT out there who you may have heard of, that's super interesting, that sort of tries to align more real estate type lending because of the 25-year life with solar. And so that's really interesting. And I think creating efficiencies in financing is absolutely going to be a huge part of keeping the foot on the gas and continuing to drive more adoption, whether it be in the renewables or kind of on the demand side, where you all do a lot of work. I wanted to ask you about LED lighting, because I know you all offer your customers LED lighting upgrades. We do as well. Our strategy now is that, we don't necessarily have an active like lighting only sales force that is out developing new projects. But when our customers need it, we obviously understand the electrical and the labor side of it, and then we have good ways to purchase fixtures and everything like that. But it's been a mainstream kind of topic for 10 plus years now. Are you still finding there's a lot of opportunities out there, and why do you think folks haven't we probably consider that low hanging fruit? What do you think is the number one reason why they haven't converted yet and taken that kind of step?
If you look back a few years, and it's really about the cost of the technology and how it keeps coming down so really fast. I think part of it is especially when you're dealing with kind of smaller commercial size organizations, and I would call it low hanging fruit. It's kind of one of those things, depending on what their energy rates are. You could see anywhere from 2 to 5 year kind of max payback period, just cash on cash payback. But really, I think depending on what that period has looked like. I mean, we talked to a retail client, say about a year and a half ago, and they said they have over 1,000 locations nationwide, and they said we won't do anything that doesn't have a sub 2 year payback. Why? Because we lease our space. And we only do 2 year leases. And so if there isn't a payback within 2 years, and we don't know if we're going to stay there or not. Now, a lot of the times they do extend their leases, but they just, that's what it is. So with customers that don't own their buildings, the building owner doesn't have any incentive if the customer's paying their electric bills to upgrade that stuff. The tenant, unless they have a long enough term to kind of cover that, is also saying, I don't have enough incentive to make that change. And so there really is a ton out there that hasn't been done. And just about, every job we come across probably has some aspect of lighting opportunity associated with it. Whether they choose to do it or not, that's a different question. Again, it comes down to, and this is also an issue that we deal with behind the meter solar, even in areas where you have really good paybacks, let's say like San Diego, which has really high energy rates, or New Jersey, which has really nice incentives from the TREC, the renewable energy credits side of things. It's how long is my lease on this building? I've got 5-year lease, even a 7-year lease. I'm 3 years into a 10-year, and you're just barely cutting into the payback period and saying, does this make sense? And then when you break it into an IRR over such a short period of time, you're not hitting hurdle rates. So how do you incentivize, the facility owner in those cases to participate in this and say, hey, we're upgrading your facility. Maybe the customer pays for X percentage of it, and you pay for, tenant improvement. You've got TI for certain things sometimes, right? So, but those conversations, the tenants, again, it's an education process. We have to talk to them about that and say, hey, ask your landlord this, or let us talk to them. And those, it just takes time to get through that. And some people just aren't willing, and so, there's still a lot to do out there, and especially in commercial buildings. I see, I walk around commercial buildings all the time and see, fluorescent lights everywhere, right? And even incandescent lots, right? I mean, it's kind of, you kind of look around and you're like, man, this is, we're involved in the industry and we're intimately involved. And so you think everybody's doing this and it's a no brainer and it's just so easy, right? Like, why wouldn't you do this? But, you have to kind of take a step back and try to understand that not everybody is getting, sees all the information that we see and what's going on in this industry. And it's really hard to do, actually. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, this is coming. Yeah. My friends, and this is happening. They're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, what, you don't know about this?
Yeah. Right. My wife jokes, one way that you're an energy geek is when you walk into a building and the first thing you do is look up at the light fixtures. And that's a bad habit of mine.
Talk to your manager.
She likes to, yeah, exactly. And so you mentioned controls there, and that's a part of the equation that I think is really often overlooked because LED lighting, you have, there's been enough buzz about it. Everybody's had somebody call them to try to upgrade their lighting. They know that it saves money. They just haven't done it yet for whatever reason. But I think that building controls are, for whatever reason, seem to get sort of glossed over a lot of the times. And I think it's extremely important. And at BioStar, we started our demand side business in the lighting business. We were doing lighting retrofits, and we really expanded our offering because that's what the market was calling for. We just kept hearing over and over again, well, yeah, controlling my lighting is great, but what about controlling my thermostats? I think that my HVAC is running when it shouldn't be, or I think my HVAC is really the biggest part of our bill, and can I control the whole building? And I'd like to put some new automatic locking doors at the front. Can you do that? And so I think it's really a fascinating value proposition. I know from experience that when it's done right, it can be cost effective and generate a lot of savings. Just talk a little bit about how you view kind of that optimization piece and using smart controls in buildings to not only save energy and money, but to sort of improve the operations of a building.
Yeah, I really like looking at BAS EMS systems and trying to understand them. I think I'll tell you what the first challenge is there's so many out there, and
Yeah.
filter through that and saying, one solution isn't going to make sense for every different type of facility out there, right? There's just so many different technology partners, and to get experience with all of them, would mean that you'd have to have these things installed in multiple different types of locations. And the reality is getting comfortable with the groups that you're working with is really important. But of course, their technology working and doing what it says they can do is important is probably number one. But really, just having a comfort and understanding and a good partnership with folks. And so we tend to kind of lean on certain technologies, but there's just so many out there. So I think that becomes a challenge, for folks and then for us too, as solution providers, to say we want to recommend something. We have to really be comfortable with it and really understand and know that our client is going to be happy with it.
Sure.
In terms of the value proposition, I think, obviously you can automate, everything, just about everything, but there's a cost to it, right? So where is that balance of, cost and savings? There's an optimization problem essentially to solve there. And then, there's a from an efficiency perspective, from a market participation and risk mitigation perspective, especially in areas where you can be compensated for demand reduction during certain times of the year or certain times of the day. And also depending on in deregulated markets, if you have some exposure to the market because you're looking to take advantage of low real-time prices, it becomes a risk mitigation tool to say, if the prices do spike, and real-time prices, go up to thousands of dollars. Well, I have this lever that I can pull, and it's automated, and I want to be able to participate in the market in that way. And so I think that these automation, these control systems have come a long way to how they interact. Not just being on timers, like, the simple stuff that we have at home, say, okay, at this time, my AC turns to 72 and later on it turns to, 68, or whatever it is. There is an actual integration with the market, and we're seeing an increase in that type of technology. It's all been there already. It's a matter optimizing those solutions, and it's all about the software that's behind it. It's not the hardware. The hardware exists, right? I access my thermostat and change it on my phone if I want, but how do I automate that change and it be based on some set of information, whether that be a forecast or a historical view of what, the market has done and what this type of day looks like and such. So all really, really interesting stuff. And there are solutions out there. And I think any commercial building, when I say commercial building, I think like office buildings, they're all going to have some kind of control system installed. Now, there's still a lot of buildings out there that have systems that we've come across that are from the 70s or 80s.
Yeah.
They haven't updated them. And these people that are working there have been there for 20 years and it works for them. And but what they're not realizing is, you can spend $200,000 to $300,000 to retrofit this thing, and all of a sudden you're saving, $50,000+ a year that you didn't even know existed, because there's a lot of waste with some of these old pneumatic systems that are out there. And same thing, just technology becoming more and more efficient and cost effective. It's a really important piece to look at, and requires a certain level of expertise, not only from a market perspective, but specifically to the controls around HVAC and lighting, and what the capabilities would be to participate in the market.
Sure. Well, it's fascinating stuff. And if anybody has, particularly folks in Texas, where you're located, right, has heard this podcast and wants to connect with Sean or follow E-Volve as we kind of wrap up here, let our listeners and viewers know how to find you online. Are you tweeting? Are you on LinkedIn? What's a good way to get in touch and keep in touch with Sean and with E-Volve?
Sure. So you probably find me most in communicating with peers on LinkedIn. That's where I get my industry news. And you can get me on email by email at sandrews@e-volve evolve.energy. But again, LinkedIn is an easy way to message me or to kind of follow what we're doing at Evolve.
Awesome. And we'll make sure that your email address, if you're okay with it, is in the show notes, and your LinkedIn profile link. And like I said earlier, thank you for the opportunity to kind of look at some things and work on some things for your customers and collaborate together since we've known each other over the last year or so. It's been really a pleasure getting to know you both personally and via business, and really, really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. I hope you'll come back and talk about how your year went. Maybe we'll try and circle up at the end of 21 or the beginning of 2022. Right. Sean Andrews, thank you so much for coming on the show, and don't be a stranger. Come back and see us.
And thanks for having me, David. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks.